And welcome to the 7 p.m. June 5th meeting of the City Council's Finance Committee, which is actually a continuation of the meetings of May 29th and May 30th, during which we held budget hearings. And we adjourned the second of those last Thursday and are picking up now. I am Councilor Stan Moulton, Vice Chair of the Finance Committee. In the absence of Chair Councilor Rachel Maori, I will be presiding tonight. Laura, would you call the roll of Finance, please?
Sure. As Councilor Moulton said, Chair Maori is not present. Councilor Moulton?
Here.
Councilor Elkins?
Here.
And Councilor Labarge?
Here.
Thank you.
You have a quorum. Yeah.
Thank you. So I want to explain how we're going to proceed tonight. This is an unusual situation. Had we continued our meeting last Thursday, we would have deliberated on the original financial orders that the mayor filed. Things have changed in the last 6 days. The mayor has filed 2 amended orders, which will be discussed tomorrow night by the City Council. Because of that, we are also taking those up tonight in terms of our deliberations and recommendations to the council. I will ask, in a few minutes, I'm going to ask the mayor to explain the 2 amended orders. And because of the significant new information, I believe, that will be offered tonight, the level of interest in the community about the budget, and my goal of trying to circulate accurate information in the community, I've decided, rather than the original thought was for this meeting not to have public comment because it was a continuation of budget hearings, and by my count, we heard about 70 people last week and gathered dozens of questions which were directed at department heads. But rather than not have any public discourse tonight, and after conferring with the city solicitor and council president Jarrett, I settled on an hour-long question and answer period, which will follow the mayor's presentation. Then the finance committee will have an opportunity to ask questions of the mayor and the finance director. And following that, we'll have that hour-long Q&A. And I want to emphasize, this is not traditional public comment. If you want to make a statement, the time to do that is during tomorrow night's public comment period at the beginning of the city council meeting at 6:30, which will be in the council chambers. This is really an opportunity to open space for people who have questions. This is information that's being publicly discussed for the first time tonight. If you have questions, I will recognize you. You'll have 2 minutes to ask a question. They'll be directed at the committee. And then either the finance committee or, if appropriate, the mayor or finance director will answer those questions. We'll take those questions as they come. We're not going to wait until the end. Following an hour of that discussion, Q&A, then, and just to back up for a minute, by way of explanation, because the full council is not in session tonight, councilors who are not on the finance committee will be part of that hour-long Q&A if other councilors who are here want to ask questions. Following that, then the finance committee will deliberate on the 6 orders that are on the agenda tonight. Okay, so Mayor, if you would like to address the 2 amended orders that you have filed, please.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. I'm happy to go over the amendments that I've submitted. I'll start with the smaller one, which is the solid waste enterprise. So we have maintained the transfer station hours for the time being, addressing the immediate concern. And we'll be looking at the ordinances relating to the transfer station and figuring out a path forward to ensure that its finances are balanced for the next year. Moving on to the budget order. So on the council agenda tomorrow are some revised orders for the FY25 budget, as well as the orders that I said on May 16th would be brought to the next council meeting. Last year, to help address what was a $2.3 million school budget deficit, the council and I provided a one-time transfer of $1.2 million from our fiscal stabilization funds. So the reductions necessary to close the deficit could be spread over a 2-year period. To best determine how to implement those reductions, I asked Northampton Public Schools Superintendent Portia Bonner to begin the conversation with a first look budget in December. For those unfamiliar with the process, according to Mass General Law and the Northampton School Committee policy and the MASC, Massachusetts Association of School Committees policy, the preparation of the annual operating budget is the responsibility of the superintendent, and the school committee shall review and approve a budget. What Dr. Bonner presented to the school committee on December 13th totaled $40.8 million. By this point, the deficit had grown to $4.77 million, and the first look budget left about half of that deficit unaddressed. As the school budget, like other budgets, is mostly composed of salaries, which increase every year, this deficit will continue to get larger each year unless we align recurring expenses with recurring revenues. In January, I gave the required review of the financial condition of the city and revenue expenditure forecasts at the joint meeting of the City Council, the school committee, and Smith Vogue trustees in order to develop a coordinated budget. In this presentation, it was noted that the city could provide a $38 million NPS budget while adhering to the fiscal stability plan and holding off the time for our next override for a year. In the following months, conversation and debate about the school budget centered more on whether instead of how to address the deficit and align it with resources, leading to the school committee proposing a budget totaling $42.8 million that instead of having cuts to address the deficit had additions and left the $4.77 million deficit fully unaddressed. Given this, in the budget I presented to the City Council in May, I sought to increase the school budget as much as possible within our fiscal constraints, increasing my original estimate of $38 million to $39.7 million. As detailed in the budget message, this required cuts to non-school departments and other city obligations, and another transfer from the Fiscal Stabilization Fund of $1.24 million. Such a transfer, which requires City Council approval, would trigger a need for a $3 million override to continue the fund and increase the amount of recurring revenues available to maintain that level of school funding. As was the case with the 2013 and the 2020 overrides, the latter being implemented in FY22, the goal is to maintain budget stability for at least 4 fiscal years before another override would be necessary to maintain services. There is an order before the City Council to place the override referendum on the ballot for this November, and if approved, it would be implemented in FY26, which begins in July 2025. Over these last several weeks, I've heard at many meetings and through communications from the community about folks' vision of the schools and their concern about the future of the educational programs. I, as the rest of us, have heard passionate speeches from teachers and students and families who care really deeply about the students and each of their educational needs. Because there wasn't a detailed conversation that happened with the school committee, it wasn't really clear what school positions would be impacted. From the details shared by the school administration since and teased out by the counselors' questions, we've all learned a lot more. It's been a moving experience to see such dedicated and such an involved school community. And it's clear that this is extremely hard for everyone involved, and I will tell you that that very much includes me. If there was a never-ending source of funding, we wouldn't have to have these difficult discussions. Unfortunately, cities do operate within financial restrictions, including or especially Prop 2.5, and especially for Northampton, the lack of state support through Chapter 70 and our outgoing charter tuition. As mayor, it's my responsibility to put forward a complete and a balanced budget for the entire city that is not just affordable for 1 year, but is sustainable for the out years as well. We have seen what happens in the schools when we try to balance with unsustainable funds. You have a ballooning deficit. While I was heartened by the fact that most elementary school class projections are not more than 21 students and that middle school classes are projected to have an average of 25 students, I share the concern of Jackson Street School families about class sizes that are significantly higher than the other elementary schools. I also shared the concern about the loss of the interventionists, and while glad that some of the cuts for the high school were reinstated, there's still some of concern that remain. To help mitigate these remaining concerns, I've submitted an amended FY 2025 general fund budget, which includes the use of an additional $737,566 from the Fiscal Stability Stabilization Fund, bringing the total appropriation from that fund to $1,980,757, and bringing the FY 25 Northampton Public Schools budget to $40,778,585, the amount of Dr. Bonner's first view budget. Exactly which positions could be retained with these additional funds will be determined by the schools, presumably at the June 13th school committee meeting. Also in the amended order is the forthcoming $500,000 gift from Smith College that President Willie LeBreton and I announced, and which I have directed to MPS's operating budget over a 3-year period, adding another $166,666 to the FY 25 budget. The amended budget also incorporates an assumed affirmative vote by the Northampton School Committee and the City Council to use $200,528 from a new Northampton Public Schools Special Education Stabilization Fund. The orders to create that fund, to seed it with the undesignated funds, and the council order to appropriate the annual funds that are on the agenda tomorrow. If those orders are not approved by both bodies, those funds would need to be cut. As I mentioned in my previous budget message, our revenue projections were pushed in FY 24, and those projections have been pushed even higher in FY 25. As part of the budget process, every department is given guidelines in which to develop their budget under their process using their staff to determine their needs within the expected revenue projections. I instructed the city departments to hold their budgets to 2.5% increase as much as possible while still maintaining their contractual budget obligations. During each of the individual department budget meetings, where we go over operations, budget expenditures, and needs, I pushed department heads again, denying increases that, while needed, are just not affordable this year. During the weeks that followed, I went back again and requested additional cuts from larger departments in order to accommodate other increases. All of this is done to create a balanced general fund budget that is workable not only for FY 25, but is sustainable through FY 2029. There's a great deal of work that has gone into creating this budget and many sacrifices made to get to this point. I will not support the continual use of one-time funds, perpetuating a cycle of creating deficits. In this latest amended budget, using the additional fiscal stability stabilization funds and committing those funds to be included in the base of the school budget's next year's percent increase calculation, doing this so as not to create a deficit. To do this has required pushing revenues even further and has required cutting more appropriations to the Capital Stabilization Fund in the out years. To keep to a $3 million override that will last 4 years, we will need to return to a projected 3% increase for the schools in FY 26, which hopefully can build back to 4% in the future. This will get the school budget and the city back in line with the fiscal stability plan and back to stable and sustainable increases. This plan still requires the use of the fiscal stability stabilization reserves to bridge the last 2 years of the plan to get through all 4 years. It is why we need the reserves long-term, and we need to work together to make progress on our priorities. This total increase to NPS represents an 8% increase, including the one-time $1.2 million from last year, or an 11.5% increase on the base of last year. By either calculation, this is the largest percent increase to the Northampton Public Schools in at least 32 years. So thank you for letting me present those amendments to you all, and I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilors Elkins or Labarge, questions for the mayor? Councilor Labarge.
Yes, Mayor, I want to thank you and your finance team of doing what you've done with these amendments. It has not been easy here. Even when we had our joint city council and school committee meetings, we were told then that things did not look good. and to see the changes that are occurring with these amendments, I thank you. I thank you very much. We look at an 8% increase, plus what from last year, it was what, 11.5% you said?
It's 11.5% on the base. So if that one time $1.2 million, if you don't include that as it was one-time money, then it's 11.5%.
Right. It's just amazing here. I mean, we're trying to do the best we can. Money's not growing on trees here, and I wish it was, but there is a difference here compared to the other budget that was presented. Plus the fact, last Thursday at our city council meeting, I'm going to be truthful from my heart here. I was very confused because of the budget that we were given from the school department, from their financial director, Bunny, whatever her first name was, and the superintendent. To see two of them presenting the budget, Mayor, and all of a sudden, her assistant finance director comes out and states, no, that's not right information. It was like, what's going on here as far as communication? I want to tell you, I really appreciate what you have done here. This didn't happen overnight. A lot of thinking and a lot of looking at numbers. And I want people to realize this. It's not easy. But I thank you again, Mayor, and thank Chardine too, and Calvin.
Thank you, Councilor. Yes, that is true. Thank you.
Councilor Elkins?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for going back, scraping again, revisiting, revisiting our policies and our commitment to them, and to find a way to keep this sustainable going forward. I wonder, and maybe this is also a question for Director Nardi, could you explain a little more about what you mean by pushing revenues? And we heard a little bit from Director Nardi about at the last finance meeting, or the last one before the budget hearings, where she talked a little bit about pushing revenue and what that means. And I wonder if we could get just a little bit more of an explanation about that.
Sure. Director Nardi, do you want to take that, or do you want me to? There you go.
Good evening. So when we say pushing revenues, what we basically have done is we've looked at our initial projections, which, as I mentioned before, we generally do that on a 5-year historical average. We look at what has come in and base it our next year's projection on that information. We also take into account what's happening in the economy, and it's not an exact science. So we usually come up with a conservative but appropriate dollar amount. In this case, the mayor has asked me to look at all of those again, and we have pushed them higher than we would generally do so in order to meet the priorities the mayor has set forth. So that means that while I believe it's fiscally responsible, and we have been fiscally responsible, being conservative with our estimates, we are pushing them a little more. We are looking that, as we noted in 2023, revenues have rebounded. We pushed them in 24 with the hope that they would increase a little bit more. And in FY25, we are betting that they will do it again. So it means we are looking at our revenue projections and asking a little more of them and hoping that they come through to support the budget that's being put forth.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes, go ahead, Councilor.
And so you used the word bet, I think, or gamble. Can you explain a little bit? Well, actually, I have two questions. So I'll ask them both, and then you can answer them. So one is how are we coming out this year relative to our revenue projections? The year is almost over, so I'm sure that is close to being able to be something. And I remember the last quarterly report, we were kind of spot on 0.75%. And then the other thing is, if you could talk a little bit about what happens? Where are we at if we lose that bet, and the revenues we undershoot? Revenue projections overshoot actual retained revenue.
So yes, as I said in the third quarter, we were just meeting our third quarter projections. In part, that was because we had one line item that was coming in significantly over. Some of our revenues come in on a quarterly basis, so it's hard to say until the state sends us theirs, and some of the other local revenues like meals, hotel, motel come in quarterly. So I can't predict how those will do. I think we were right on the money with those as well. Maybe a little bit above. So I think we're close. My hope is that we will come over projections. I haven't taken a look because, like I said, until I get the June taxes, the hotel, motel, and meals, we really won't know. But my expectation is that we will at least meet our revenue projections. If we don't, that creates a deficit for the city. That means we do not have enough money to fulfill our obligations and spend the money as we projected in the budget. Therefore, there's a couple options. The city can use reserves, and we've talked quite a lot about what happens when you fill those holes with reserves. It creates a deficit for the next year, or you make cuts. So it will depend on why we don't meet. We will be watching those revenue lines as soon as the budget is adopted. We will be looking at all of those revenue lines and how it looks for the year end, and how that actually plays into what I budgeted for FY 2025.
Thank you.
Councillor Labarge?
Yes. Chardine, since you're on, thank you. I have a question, because I know that we have heard so much about stabilization funds. You have to be careful when you use them, because the following year they might rise, or there might be a problem with that. My question is, seeing that 528 from the Northampton Public Schools Special Education Stabilization Fund. So, being that stabilization fund, we're using that, and we were told, well, we need to be careful here. So I see that that's added on there.
Yeah, so the policy guidelines that is going along with that stabilization fund is the funding source for that ongoing after the $800,000 that the mayor is asking the council to fund it with, will annually after that will be coming in from the Medicaid reimbursements that the city receives. And then the policy guideline is the amount that can be used annually the next year is that not larger than that amount. So therefore, we won't be using more money than that is coming into the stabilization fund. So there's two reasons that we have to be careful using reserves. One is you want to make sure you are not using more than you are projected to take in. The Medicaid reimbursement, that amount varies. That's why we've tied it to that number. So therefore, if it drops, then the amount that can be used that next year has to drop to the same amount. So therefore, we're not using the stabilization fund faster than we're filling it. The second piece that we will be, as part of that order, will also be any turnbacks that the city, that the school returns to the city and becomes part of the general fund, will be part of the mayor's recommended order to fund the stabilization fund. So the whole idea is we won't be drawing down that stabilization fund faster than we're filling it. In addition, stabilization funds, the interest and any gains or losses that go with that money stays in the fund. So therefore, if there's any interest, that also will accumulate in the stabilization fund supporting growth.
Also today, with all the calls I have gotten, two people had asked, well, what is the city doing with the cannabis money? And I said, well, I'll ask the finance director or the mayor. People want to know, what are we doing with it?
So yes, the cannabis funds that come in from the state, the taxes that come in, the local option tax that comes in is part of the general fund.
Thank
So
you.
therefore, it goes to support the general fund budget and all of the city services.
Okay,
So,
so
since that question is always asked, I always incorporate that into the budget message. That it has, since we first began collecting those that tax revenue, it has become part of the general fund. So it means it funds all city and school services.
yes. And I told them that, and I said, well, I'm going to ask it tonight so you can hear it. Thank you.
Sure.
So just to follow up on the question that Councilor Elkins asked, if revenue projections fall short of the actual revenue, we would then be looking at a deficit for the entire municipal budget. And it would be up to the mayor and finance director to determine how to meet that deficit through use of more reserve funds or through cuts. Is that correct?
That is correct for
Yes.
yes, for FY25 and possibly FY24, although I think we'll be okay.
Good.
And if we use stabilization, sorry to interrupt, then of course we would have to come to the council and ask for the use of those funds.
Yes. So I want to go back to the solid waste enterprise just to make sure that I understand and that everybody knows what has happened is that, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Mayor, but it appears that 15,000 has been added from retained earnings balance of the solid waste enterprise fund for FY25 to bring that appropriation up to allowing for the current hours to remain in effect for the transfer station. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And then we
Okay.
are going to work to correct that imbalance this year.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions from,
One
yes, Councilor Labarge.
Yes, I don't know if Marissa had her hand up. Did you?
No, my cat is making me play fetch.
My
while
daughter's
we
too.
do this.
Anyways, the question I have is looking at the water enterprise fund, and we are taking money from that enterprise, correct? Questions again today. People are asking, when is Coca-Cola leaving and why are we paying this extra fee when their water has decreased considerably? And I already explained to them, like Donna and the mayor had stated, that no matter what, we have to go up on the price because we're losing money, period. We're losing money there. So anyways, there's great concerns of them saying that they were moving out again, and now they're still holding back. So there's a lot out there of people asking, why are we paying this extra increase when they're still here? So there's a lot going on out there.
I hear you. Yeah, I addressed this in the budget message, and Director LaScalia may have addressed this the other day as well. I think she did during the budget hearings. But so Coca-Cola's usage has dropped considerably.
Yes,
And so if we had not instituted that base rate increase, then we would have a very significant deficit. So they are using much less water. And so that revenue needs to be made up. Otherwise, there's a deficit in the enterprise. And they, we were there for a meeting maybe 5 weeks ago or so. And they are definitely closing down operations. There was very little happening inside. They have not fully closed, but the last that they told us was August. They tend to move the goalpost, but it's very clear that little is happening inside of that that plant right now.
I thank you for that, Mayor, because like I said, some of the calls were about the Coca-Cola company again and about the water fee right down the line. Thank you.
And we should note that there was no, we did not increase water or sewer rates this year. This was just the base rate that we include. Yeah.
Yeah, my recollection, Councilor Labarge, and I see Director LaScalia here, so she'll correct me if I'm misremembering, but I believe she said that Coca-Cola was now down to under 50% of what its operation was at its height, and that she expects that Coca-Cola will be completely phased out by the end of this year.
Yeah, she did say that.
I thought I remembered that.
Yes. Yep. But try to tell that to people.
Okay. If there are no other questions from the Finance Committee now, I will move into that hour. It's 7:32 of other questions. The ground rules are simple. You'll raise your virtual hand. I will recognize you. You'll ask your question in 2 minutes or less, and then I will direct that question at either the Finance Committee or the mayor or the finance director. So I will start with Council President Jarrett.
Sorry, actually, Councilor Moulton, just real quick.
Yes.
Will folks be able to ask whether it would be a repeat of questions, or is it just your one time to speak?
I allotted an hour, so if everyone has asked a question and we still have time left in that hour, then people can come back with a second question. Is that what you were asking, Councilor Elkins? Yes. Okay. So, Council President Jarrett.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having this and having some comment available. Thank you, Mayor. So, Mayor, as you mentioned, this budget process has certainly been hard for all of us, especially for staff and parents and students. The uncertainty throughout the process with the layoffs that aren't certain may have caused us to lose staff that won't come back. And the additional funding this amendment provides will certainly help the school budget. It's much appreciated. I support it, though it does increase our financial risk. And I thank you for doing this difficult work and listening and coming to this place. My question is, what prevented this from being decided earlier in the process once we knew the concerns that the community and school committee had, or was it that we didn't know all those concerns? And how can we make sure we don't repeat this in future years? I understand this was not all mayor's responsibility, but I guess I'm asking, what part of it do you see as your responsibility, and how will you address that going forward?
Sure. So usually a lot of this discussion, the deliberation, sort of the teasing out of what a budget means for the school, it happens in the school committee. And a lot of that more detailed conversation didn't really happen. It happened after the budget, after I produced a budget, and then with the city council, which in some ways was what the school committee had asked for. They asked the city council to sort of take on this responsibility of having this conversation. So, and as I've tried to outline both in the budget message and then again tonight, this is an incredibly sort of excruciating long process of meetings and revisions and going back and looking through and asking other departments to make really significant sacrifices, and then going back again. Countless meetings and phone calls, not just with me. I mean, I don't even know how many Director Nardi has had with a lot of different departments. So this has taken a very long time. It's also, we have had to figure out other ways to make up this revenue. We're really, as I talked before, we're not supporting the OPEB trust fund that we have been building as our obligation to retirees in the way that we have wanted to. So we've scaled that back. We've also now twice scaled back what's going into capital stabilization. There are just many, and then as Director Nardi was just talking about before, really just looking at revenues and then looking at them again and looking at past years and projecting future years and trying to make our best educated guesses to push them as much as possible without being reckless with them. So this has been an incredibly long, hard process that has, taken a great deal of time and an unbelievable amount of work from, all across the city. And to answer your question on how to not have this happen again, so first, this is predicated on an override passing. You have to stay within the parameters of what we can produce revenue for, right? This is what all other departments have to do. There's a certain amount that can be increased every year. So as I said, this is the largest increase in over 32 years, probably longer than 32 years. I wasn't going to go, make my office go through paper records for decades more than that. But this is the largest increase in at least 32 years for MPS. And it's on the heels of the last 2 years, which were back to back the two largest increases in over 20 years. So we need to get back to a place where we are at a steady, sustainable increase every year that allows responsible growth. This is not special for us. We're not unique. If you look at any other community, they have the same parameters that they have to work within. It's math, and particularly in the Commonwealth, it's what we have to live with Prop 2.5. There's only so much revenue you can raise, and so everyone has to stay within a certain increase. Otherwise, you create a deficit.
Cardinal sin. Thank you, Mayor. I saw Isabel Miller next, and then Councilor Rothenberg. Isabel?
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi. Yes.
Yeah. Hi. I just have 3 really quick questions. A lot of numbers have been going around, not just tonight, but in general. So I just want to make sure that I'm correct with this. Is the proposed budget for the public school now still a cut compared to what they're working with this past school year? Not what they proposed for next, but just what they worked with currently this past school year. And then also, how much of the 40.7 million will they get for 2025, and how much is going to be spread out over 2, 3, 5 years? And then also, you mentioned something about 2026. I missed that. What was that year about? And that's all. Oh, one quick more thing. Also, I know Jackson Street, where my daughter goes, she has tons of cuts at her school. Is there some way to guarantee that Jackson Street won't be the lowest on the totem pole compared to all the other schools, or is that really up to the school committee? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. I'm going to repeat those one at a time, Mayor. Is the proposed school budget still a cut compared to the current school year?
Yes.
Is the mayor unable to unmute Laura?
Sorry, I think I can unmute now. I think I'm not, I guess I must not be a co-host because I could not unmute. Or yeah.
Laura, can you make sure the mayor's well, she's listed as a co-host. Okay. So that first question, is the proposed school budget still a cut compared with what it is currently receiving in the current year?
So last year's, so the FY 2024 budget, current year, right, is $36,565,747. So this is, I probably have an easier way to find that. So this is $40,778,585.
So the answer is no, it is not a cut.
No, it's as I said, it's a significant increase. Now there was a deficit that was created, so it doesn't address the full deficit, but they started out with a $4.7 million deficit, but the funding is increased by either 8 or 11.5%, depending on how you want to look at it.
All right, Isabel's next question was, how much of the 40.7 million is actually for FY25? Is any of that spread out over the following several years?
No, that's the FY25 budget. So that is the budget for the next fiscal year.
And she asked for you to repeat whatever you said about FY26 in relation to the school budget.
I'm not sure what I said about FY26. Other than an override, although the override would be in November, it would be implemented in FY26. So it'd be for FY26. So maybe that's what it was. So although it will take place in FY20, I mean, you have to have it take place before the next fiscal year.
So that was the reference. That money would be available starting in FY26.
Correct.
Okay. And then her final question was about Jackson Street School. And I think the question was, is there assurance that the concerns expressed about disparities at Jackson Street School will be addressed, or is that entirely up to the superintendent?
I mean, that's up to the superintendent and the school committee. I highlighted that as one of the reasons that we've made this additional appropriation, but I do not make those decisions unilaterally. And it's really up to those buildings, the decisions that get made.
Okay, thank you. Did I capture your questions, Isabel? Yes, okay. Councillor Rothenberg, please. Is she unable to unmute, Laura?
Before I get to my questions, I think what I heard about FY26 was a 3% growth rate instead of 4%. Is that right?
Oh, maybe that's what the reference was. So that, yes, so next year, a guaranteed 3%, which is what it had previously been. I have tried to provide a 4%, but if to sort of front load this now and keep it at a $3 million override, it would be, we could afford a 3% increase next year. And then the hope would be that over, hopefully we could build it back up to a 4%.
And how much did you think that would save?
How much does doing a 3? That is, I mean, Charlene, I don't know if you know exactly what percent of the 770 some odd thousand, 737,000 that accounts for.
Yeah, if you give me one moment.
Yes, why don't you calculate that? And Councilor Rothenberg, why don't you go on to your question?
Sure. Actually, all of my questions are sort of finance heavy. So the other two, I've heard you say that you've twice lowered the capital improvement deposits. Can I get the details on that?
Yeah, we would probably, I mean, Charlene, I don't know if you have.
So yeah, not the deposits. What part of the general fund budget is, you'll see a line in there that says transfer to the capital stabilization fund. So we appropriate funds out of the general fund into capital stabilization to support the continued maintenance of our facilities. That is considered a best practice to have that in your general fund operating budget. We have cut that in FY24 and we have continued to cut it in FY25. In other words, we still have it, but it's a reduced amount. By our policy, I think it increases by $25,000 a year. And we reduced it in FY24 and we've lowered it further to 200,000 in FY25 and the out years in order to make the $3 million override work.
Thanks. And the less conservative revenue estimates. I imagine that's a somewhat complex formula and you didn't just do it across the board. Is there a way that we can see the details on that?
So yes, we can actually provide the fiscal stability in the budget book right after the budget, the mayor's budget message. You will see the fiscal stability plan. It outlines the budget projections that we have calculated for FY26, 27, 28, and 29. So we have made changes to those. We have reduced, it's been a combination of things where we have increased the revenue projections and we've also reduced expenses. So it's a combination of those two things that you will see a difference of, and we can provide you with that fiscal stability updated plan with the mayor's new amended budget.
Thanks. And how much was actually spent by the schools in FY24, not just from the city budget, but just how much did it cost to run the schools from all sources?
In FY24?
Yeah, I know we're not done, and we can look at 23 too.
So I don't manage their budgets, nor do I track them. That would be a question for the business manager, Bobby Jones,
Okay.
of where they are in their where they are in the fiscal in the fiscal year and expenditures.
Okay, great. The charter schools, have we looked at taking those out of our operating budget and paying them through a reserve model instead, since they're not really operating costs of the city?
No, because for the same reasons that we've discussed, it's not a good idea to use. That's a reoccurring cost every year. And eventually our reserves would be depleted because it's a significant amount of money. So no, it is important that we raise those or have reoccurring revenues for that reoccurring expense.
So my final question, do you have that 3% growth savings
Nope.
figure?
Not yet.
Great, so I'll ask the mayor the final question. We know that we're now at the point where the superintendent's budget was, and we know that in April, the community came out essentially to protest that budget and say that wasn't sufficient. So we're still at that place with the public. What are some of your options to close the remaining $2 million that you're thinking about, knowing that all of these cuts of teachers that we've been talking about amount to $2 million? And of course, you could save some here and there, but what is the plan to close that final $2 million gap?
There are no other options to close that. This is we've pushed everything absolutely as far as we can push it, and still be somewhat responsible. And we cannot perpetuate this cycle of using one-time funds to create a bigger deficit next year. So there, I also heard school committee members say that they knew that what they had voted for was not going to be possible. So it's just, there is a very significant deficit in the schools, like there are deficits all across the Commonwealth and the country in the schools because of, and we've gone through all the reasons, and there has to be some sort of correction for that, and we have to we need to stop deficit spending, and because as we've learned every year, it just gets larger.
Thank you, Mayor. Director Nardi, do you have the calculation on the savings that 3% rather than 4% would produce?
Yes, it's a savings of $367,743. And again, as the mayor pointed out, that isn't the only year. We would have to build back up to 4% in order for the $3 million to last the full 4 years. This is based on the fiscal stability plan, and as requested, we will provide that to you. But in order to make that override work for the long term, if it passes, is to make sure that we stay within modest and reasonable and sustainable percentage increases to make that last total through FY 2029.
Thank you. So I just wanted to follow up on Councilor Rothenberg's last question. Although what the mayor is now proposing for the school department matches the bottom line numbers that the superintendent proposed in December, there is still room for the superintendent to make adjustments in how she would allocate that money. Am I correct about that, Mayor?
Yes, absolutely.
So it's while the numbers now match the budget that she proposed then, and how that money is going to be spent could change.
Yes, I think it has already changed. You know, I think it's different than what she had. You know, remember she presented that in December.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yes. It has changed because she's been working with so many different numbers in terms of what she thought was going to be allocated for the school department. And she has still the opportunity to make adjustments in that overall budget and how it's allocated, and presumably that will be done in consultation with the school committee next week. Is that your expectation?
Yes, that is my expectation, and I have spoken to her, and she's aware of this change, and I know that she is working on it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from anybody, any of the 50 people who are in attendance tonight? Yes, Councilor Clemmer. Laura, can she? Yes, there she is.
Okay, now. You.
Debbie, I don't know if she can hear us. I think she's frozen.
But yes, I can. Oh, hang on, let me move. You weren't able, I just want to clarify, I know you just said something about this, and that you weren't able to come up with this money initially because of you had to see what money we got from other sources. So that's why you were able to make these changes now. Is that correct?
Maybe, I mean, I was sort of outlining how long a process this has been. You know, I also have to add that, yes, to your point, you know, there was talks and work with Smith. We spent a lot of time working on this special education stabilization fund, talking to the state, figuring out what was possible with it. So, you know, there are many components that have gotten to this number, many different, so sacrifices by departments, pushing off obligations, not funding capital to the extent that we would like to, and pulling from other sources. So it's been a very long process.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just, there were many unfortunate comments that, you know, this wasn't done earlier, and it could have been. So I just appreciate all the work that you and the department heads and Director Nardi put into this, and you know, being able to come up with a little bit of extra money for, not a little bit, but almost $1 million extra for the schools. So I want to thank you for doing that. Yeah.
Thank you, Councilor Clemmer. Anybody else? Karen Schiaffo.
There she is.
Hello, I'm here
Hi.
now. Thank you.
Yes.
Good evening. We hear that we need to stop deficit spending, but I'm wondering if there's a plan. Could someone, perhaps the mayor, outline the plan going forward about what's going to help the schools manage this in the future?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So that's the question, Mayor. Deficit spending, how are we going to deal with it in the future?
Sure. So, so last year, the $1.2 million that came out of the Fiscal Stability Stabilization Fund they were one-time funds, which then contributed to a larger deficit this year. I will not do this I will not do that anymore because it creates a larger deficit. So all of these increases, again, this is the largest increase in over 32 years, have been folded into the base. So this will be the base on which the increase next year will be based on. So as long as the override, we pass the override and we stay within the possible percent increases, then we should have reset and will not have a deficit again.
What happens if the override doesn't pass?
If the override doesn't pass, as I've been very clear about, if the override doesn't pass, there will have to be significant cuts.
Is there no other option? Like, can we as a city appeal to the state? What other mechanisms can we use? Because the schools can't generate funds. So the city has to help us.
And so we've increased the base by a lot. We can and should and do and should continue appealing to the state. It is absolutely impossible that we get such a small percent of Chapter 70 funds. So any of these increases have to be, that revenue needs to be created from taxpayers. It's not coming from the state. So Senator Comerford and Representative Sabadosa have been working very hard on this. I believe that there is actually going to be a serious look at Chapter 70 this year, thanks to their advocacy. Senator Comerford, I know, has been working very, very hard on this. So yes, we all need to keep working on the state to get more Chapter 70. This year, only 17% of our budget is comprised of Chapter 70, where a lot of the other communities around us are more like 30%, 40%. You have some communities like Holyoke or Springfield that are 80%, right? So that's the majority, the vast majority of their budget is covered by the state. It is the opposite for us. It's less than 20% of our budget is covered by the state. So that has to be made up by recurring revenue that comes from the taxpayers. There's not another way to generate it.
Okay.
Thank you. Karen, let me go? I want to go on to Tom, and then we'll come back to you, okay?
Of course. Thank you.
Okay, Tom? Can you unmute, Tom?
I'm asking him to unmute.
I think we were canceling each other out, Marissa. I'll stop asking myself.
Oh, stop asking. Okay, I'm going to ask now. Don't do anything. Ask to unmute. I've clicked it a couple of times. I guess we can.
All right, we'll
come
back to Tom. Karen, you have one last question.
She probably needs to be unmuted.
There she is.
so many buttons to press. My question is, will the new music venues and the uptick in town, will that help to create fund, like generate more funds? Is that promising to you?
Thank you for that question. That is very promising to me. It's one of the reasons why we work so hard on economic development. One of, in addition to tax revenue, the only other way that we can create revenue is new growth. And but also, we have the local excise taxes that we get from hotel, motel, and meals tax we rely on them more than many other communities because our downtown is such an engine for our budget and for our general fund. So yes, it is. I am very hopeful that we will be able to generate more local revenue that way.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Karen. All right, Tom, your hand is still up. We don't hear you. You still are muted. I guess you will continue to try to unmute yourself. Meanwhile, I'm going to go on to Kate. Kate Fontaine. We've got two Kates. Kate Fontaine, please.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. So my question is about the school budget. And so I'm hearing everything that's being stated, and I'm still confused as to what the city's plan is and in the mayor's plan to address the fact that in 2017, obviously under a previous administration, the WINS model was introduced, which added staff to the schools to fulfill a special education obligation. The idea was they would bring in more full inclusion, but that required more staff. And the result of bringing in that additional staff was that it was never built into the budget. So there's all this conversation about the schools not being, not following through, essentially, is what it sounds like, on their budget. But I'm confused as to how the city thought we could fund a brand new initiative and not build it into the budget. Because I understand there's a deficit, but part of the reason there's a significant deficit is that a program was added without a source for funding. So I'm wondering what the city's plan is to address that.
So I'll restate that question as I understand it. That is that in 2017, a new inclusion model was adopted in the schools that required more staff. That was not then properly funded with recurring funds in the school budget. And how is that need for accounting for that additional staff? How is that need being addressed?
So I can't speak to 2017. There was significant staff that was added after during the pandemic, which a lot of the deficit, or some of the deficit, comes from the fact that we relied on school choice funds, which now were spent into deficit, and also ESSER, so the federal funds that sunset in September for those additions. So that is what I know about the deficit and staff that has been added.
So can I ask a follow-up?
Yes, go ahead.
So what I'm hearing is that a new educational program was approved, but there was never a plan to fund it, and that there still is not a plan to fund it.
So in 2017, the schools had a 3% increase. In 2018, they had a 3% increase. In 2019, they had a 3% increase. In 2020, there was a 4.5% increase. So I'm not sure if those years didn't produce a deficit, then I'm not sure why it's being attributed to those changes.
Well, because the money for that program was being paid for out of school choice funds, as you just stated.
Some of it, but the school choice funds didn't end up going into deficit until I think 2023. So maybe they started to be overused, but then they were used even more with additional staffing that was added during the pandemic. plus the ESSER funds.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kate. I'm gonna go next to the Kate Zach.
Hi there. I
Hi.
was hoping you could explain Prop 2.5 just a little bit. I think I've been to all of the budget meetings for the school committee and city council since December, and it's the one piece I don't quite have a handle on. Can you explain exactly what is capped?
So either Mayor or Director Nardi want to give a little primer on Proposition 2.5.
Do you want to take this one, Director Nardi? I mean, I'm happy to do it. Okay. Oh, there she is.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. So the Proposition 2.5 law was enacted in 1980, and it strictly limits the amount of property tax revenue a municipality may raise through the property taxes. So we can raise the entire levy by 2.5% only. And then that amount gets distributed based on the assessed property values to each of our property owners. So that doesn't mean that your property tax will only, or the tax that you pay the city will only go up 2.5%. It may go up more, it may go up less, but the city is capped. In other words, we can't just say, we need $6 million, so we're going to raise taxes to get that money. Without going to the voters and asking them to raise taxes, the tax levy above 2.5%. That's why we need an override. It is a question put to the voters, requesting that we exceed that 2.5% increase on our tax levy, which is the amount that we may raise taxes.
And not every community taxes to their levy, but we do.
We do.
Can I add a contribution to that,
Yes, go ahead, please.
Councilor Moulton?
Yes.
So I was reading that Framingham has so systematically and for so many years failed to raise tax at the top of their levy that they could raise $45 million without a Prop 2.5 override. Which speaks to years and years of not doing their utmost to tax at the top of their levy. Anyway, just a little food for thought.
Thank you. Okay, I hope that gives Kate a bit of an insight into what Proposition 2.5's impact is. Next, Meg Robbins.
It's actually, it's on my computer. It's on my computer. Hello?
Tom, I hear you now.
Yeah. Trying to figure out. We're both on our computers, so it's going to be short. I'm on my cell phone, but whatever. It's going to be short, a little bit pedantic. I used to teach public finance and economics. So there, does that work?
Yes, yes, that's much better, Tom. Thank you.
So in public finance, governmental units raise revenues, they tax, they charge fees for things. That's one side of the ledger. The other side of the ledger is expenditures. The differences between revenues and expenditures are either surpluses or deficits. If expenditures are in excess of revenues, that's a deficit. If revenues are in excess of expenditures, then you have a surplus. Local governments are required to have balanced budgets. Over the last several years, the city of Northampton has successfully ended up with neither a deficit or a balance, but rather has had surplus funds. Call them what you will, free cash. They end up in stabilization compartments, stabilization funds. What's at issue around the school, Northampton Public Schools budget, is that the school committee has suggested a budget that's in excess of what the mayor originally asked for, in excess of what the superintendent presented in her first look budget. And the difference is that one is larger than the other, regardless of which ones you compare. Let's take the school committee's recommendation for a level services budget. That's in excess of what the mayor's offered by about $2 million. That's not a deficit. It's an unfunded request. And I would hope that we could continue to use proper language to define what's at issue. The school departments don't have a deficit. They ask for money, and then they're granted a certain amount of money. Thanks.
Okay, do you have a question that's related to that?
That's not a question.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, Meg, are you still also attempting to speak?
No.
No, she's not. Okay. Any further questions? Okay. If not, I am going to have a short recess, a 5-minute recess, and then the Finance Committee will be back to deliberate on these orders. So at 8:18, we will return. Thank you. We are back. Laura, can you hear me? Laura, you're muted.
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. We are back and now ready to begin deliberating the 6 orders related to the FY25 budget. I'm going to read. The first one is 24069. Can you share the screen, Laura, so everybody is can see what we're considering?
You want me to share the amended version of 24?
I want you to share the amended version 24069 in order to approve FY 2025 general fund budget. The sum of $116,365,607, which is the full amount necessary for the fiscal year 2025 general fund budget, July 1, 2024 to June 30th, 2025, be appropriated for the purposes stated, provided the appropriation for Smith Vocational Agricultural High School shall be used solely for the purposes of meeting net school spending as defined by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and no funds so appropriate shall be transferred to any account or expended for any purpose that would not be included in the calculation of net school spending. To meet this appropriation, $1,283,712 will be raised and appropriated from parking meter receipts reserved, $1,050,260 from sewer enterprise funds, $707,471,000 from water enterprise funds, $94,181 from solid waste enterprise funds, $341,125 from stormwater enterprise funds, $12,680 from Community Preservation Act administrative funds, $14,450 from the reserve for police station debt service, $1,980,757 from the fiscal stabilization fund, $200,528 from the Northampton Public Schools Special Education Stabilization Fund, $166,666 $666,000 from the Smith College gift, and $110,513,777 will be raised and appropriated. That is the amended general fund. I'm not going to go through the line items, but that is the first order that we're considering tonight. And I think to discuss it, we should have a motion on the floor. Councilor Elkins.
Move to make a put it forward to the full council with a positive recommendation.
Is there a second?
Yes, I will second that.
Okay. Motion made by Councilor Elkins, seconded by Councilor Labarge. And just to be clear, we can make our own amendments as long as they're reductions, if we wish to in putting forward this order. Okay, we have a motion on the floor for a positive recommendation. Discussion. Councilor Elkins.
I want to thank the mayor for continuing to search and through this ongoing discussion. I am particularly concerned now that we have reached this point in our budget process that we still have outstanding, there's still decisions to be made and finalized on the school's guide about what this budget means in terms of people's jobs and what schools will look like next year. I will be voting to well, it's my motion. There's only 3 of us here tonight, but I will be voting in favor to give this a positive recommendation. And I am very hopeful that that the full council will be voting on this tomorrow, so that and that there won't be any delay in moving this forward and approving this budget, so that the school committee that the schools and the school committee and the superintendent can let folks know how exactly we're going forward. I think it's a pretty untenable situation to folks who are thinking about and suggesting delaying our vote tomorrow, that we might kick this into later in June, so that folks who are working in our schools might be ending their school year without knowing what the issue is. I also understand that the superintendent needs a voted budget to recall staff. So folks who are, I think, been given pink slips, they cannot be recalled if their positions now become available because of the additional funds, unless we approve a budget. So I just want to reiterate that if we delay voting tomorrow and push this later into June, people waiting to understand if they will continue to have a job will not. So I will be voting. I vote tonight to give this positive recommendation. I want to approve this budget as soon as possible.
Thank you, Councilor Elkins. Councilor Labarge.
Yes, I want to echo some of the things that Councilor Elkins had mentioned. If you look at that budget in, on May 16th, and then take the budget right now, amended on June 6th, let's take a look at the Physical Stability Stabilization Fund. In 16, it was 1,243,201. And now, as of June 6th, and here we have our Finance Committee meeting looking at this amendment, of the difference here of 1,980,757 from the Physical Stability Stabilization Fund. There's been movement here. Didn't happen overnight. There was a lot of serious looking at where to add on more money on this budget, period. I'm going to support this budget with a positive recommendation, even at City Council.
Thank you, Councilor Labarge. Yes, I too will support this with a positive recommendation tonight. I echo Councilor Elkins' urging that the council approve this budget tomorrow night. It is the right thing to do. It's the humane thing to do. We have to end the uncertainty about the school allocation and the job situation in the schools. And while I feel terrible when voting for any budget that means a loss of jobs. We have to get on with settling on a budget. This is a budget that I think maintains a good level of services across the board. And I will say again that what we've heard, that there are many unfunded needs in the city. We heard department heads talk last Thursday about concerns they have about staffing. Why didn't they include them in their budget requests? Is because they adhere to the mayor's request that their budgets be kept to 2.5% or close to that. I'm most concerned about fire rescue dispatch. That's an area that I believe we need to look at soon in the coming years about increasing staffing. In terms of the school budget, I too thank the mayor for all of her efforts, all of the ideas, suggestions that I've heard in the community. The mayor has incorporated into her final budget for the schools. We're taking nearly $2 million from the stabilization fund. It's a calculated risk. We're doing things like decreasing the transfer from the general fund to the capital stabilization fund. We're delaying the contribution to other post-employment benefits. We are creating a special education stabilization fund for the schools. that proposal is before us, before the city council and the school committee. And we are pushing, as both the mayor and the finance director said tonight, we're pushing our revenue projections to a level that it's a bet, and my hope is that bet pays off. If it doesn't, we'll be looking at how to deal with deficit in FY25 that affects the entire municipal budget. But the mayor has done a tremendous work in coming up with a budget that now matches what the new superintendent, who within the first 6 months of her tenure proposed. She came here with fresh eyes, and she proposed a budget that she felt met the needs of the Northampton public schools. And I commend the mayor for the work that she's done on this. So I will also vote a positive recommendation. Councilor Labarge.
Yes, and also too, if you look at that budget for May 16th, it didn't have any type of formula, which we do have. The 528 from the Northampton Public Schools Special Education Stabilization Fund. That was not in that report on the 16th on the budget. That was added on to this one too. And I will say again, which I did before, I thank the mayor, I thank Chardine and the team that worked tirelessly to make this budget to the best that they could. It all did not happen overnight. They've done the best, we're doing our best. And I have to agree with Councilor Elkins, when all of a sudden you love your job and then you're told you no longer have your job. Well, let's see what happens here. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, Laura.
Councilor Moulton.
Yes.
Councilor Elkins.
Yes.
And Councilor Labarge.
Yes.
That positive recommendation on general fund order as amended is unanimous. Next up is 24070, in order to approve FY 2025 Sewer Enterprise Fund budget. The sum of $6,177,500, which is the full amount necessary for the fiscal year 2025 Sewer Enterprise Fund budget, July 1, 2024 to June 30th, 2025, be appropriated for the purposes stated, and to meet said appropriation, $5,127,240 is to be raised from sewer receipts, and $1,050,260 shall be allocated to indirect costs. Is there a motion for?
No.
Councilor Moulton, I wonder
Yes.
if we might be able to move the remaining enterprise orders
As a group?
for a positive recommendation as a group.
Okay. I am fine with that. Is that good with you, Councilor Labarge?
Yeah, it is. I was going to raise my hand if we could do
Okay.
that. It's a
Okay,
package.
so so we'll consider them as a group. Let me just go through them and read them so everybody who's watching knows what we're voting on. And Laura, you can share the screen as I read, if you would, please. So the second enterprise budget is 24072. In order to approve FY 2025 Solid Waste Enterprise Fund budget as amended, ordered that the sum of $647,534, which is the full amount necessary for the fiscal year 2025 Solid Waste Enterprise Fund budget, July 1, 2024 to June 30th, 2025, be appropriated for the purposes stated, and to meet said appropriation, $522,471 is to be raised from solid waste receipts. $94,181 shall be allocated to indirect costs, and $30,882 to be made available from the retained earnings balance of the Solid Waste Enterprise Fund. The next enterprise fund is
Sewer enterprise. The next is store enterprise.
Yes, yes, yes. No, I read the sewer enterprise.
Oh, you read
That is 24070. The 24071 is the water enterprise. Do you have that, Laura?
Yeah,
I thought we just did 072, which is the solid waste enterprise fund budget, which was amended.
Councilor Moulton, I thought you read 24071, and I was expecting you to read 24070. I don't think,
Okay.
if I could be incorrect, but I
All right.
24071.
Okay, I am correct.
I think you skipped 24070. Did you?
Okay. Yes, I see that here. Okay. I read water enterprise. So sewer enterprise fund budget. The sum of $6,177,500, which is the full amount necessary for the fiscal year 2025 sewer enterprise fund budget, July 1, 2024 to June 30th, 2025, be appropriated for the purposes stated, and to meet said appropriation, $5,127,240 is to be raised from sewer receipts, and $1,050,200 shall be allocated to indirect costs. Okay, and then the other enterprise budget is 24073. In order to approve FY 2025 Stormwater and Flood Control Enterprise Fund budget, order that the sum of $1,996,486, which is the full amount necessary for the fiscal year 2025 Stormwater and Flood Control Enterprise Fund budget, July 1, 2024 to June 30th, 2025, be appropriated for the purposes stated, and to meet said appropriation, $1,655,361 is to be raised from stormwater and flood control receipts, and $341,125 shall be allocated to indirect costs. Those are the 4 enterprise budgets.
Yep.
Is there a motion on a recommendation on those 4 as a group?
Yes, I make
to.
Okay. Motion made by Councilor Labarge, seconded by Councilor Elkins. Is there any discussion on the enterprise fund budgets? No? Seeing none. Laura, roll call, please.
Councilor Elkins,
Yes.
Councilor Labarge,
yes.
and Councilor Moulton.
Yes. That positive recommendation is unanimous on the 4 enterprise fund budgets. Finally, the last one before us tonight is the FY 2025 revolving funds. Ordered that in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 44, Section 53E, 1-2, the city shall vote to vote the limit on the total amount that may be expended from each revolving fund established by Chapter 16 of the city ordinances. The revolving funds, energy and sustainability, $150,000, hazmat, $95,000. DPW Public Works Construction Services, $25,000. Senior Services Transportation, $50,000. Senior Services Activities, $175,000. Senior Services Food Services, $90,000. Senior Services Publications, $35,000. Athletic League fees, $200,000. JFK Family Aquatic Center, $125,000. NPS Transportation, $200,000. Smith Vocational Agricultural High School Farm, $130,000. Tourism Directional Sign Program, $10,000. Public Health Nursing Program, $100,000. James House, $85,000. Sharps Disposal Program, $15,000. Fire Alarm Monitoring Program, $60,000. And the DPW Reuse Committee, $15,000, for a total of $1,560,000 in the revolving funds. Is there a motion to approve, to send for a positive recommendation?
With a positive recommendation.
Council,
Second.
Motion made by Councilor Labarge, seconded by Councilor Elkins. Any discussion on the revolving funds? No? Laura, roll call, please.
Councillor Labarge,
Yes.
Councillor Moulton,
Yes.
and Councillor Elkins.
Yes.
That positive recommendation is unanimous. That is the end of the financial orders. Councilor Labarge.
Yes, I just want to mention about the enterprise funds that we just made recommendations to full city council. Is that the tour that we took with the director of DPW, Donna Wiscalia, it is amazing with all the departments here that we just approved of how much work is involved there. A lot of work involved for employees running those departments. I just want to thank all those employees.
Yes, thank you, Councilor Labarge. These are numbers on a piece of paper and they don't represent that tremendous amount of work. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, that concludes our business tonight. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second it.
Roll call, Laura, please, on the motion to adjourn.
Councillor Moulton,
Yes.
Councillor Elkins,
Yes.
and Councillor Labarge.
Yes.
Unanimously adjourned at 8:40. Thank you, councilors. Thank you, Mayor Charlene Nardi,